Mm. Now let's talk about that idea of faith and science and how they go together, because I think in a lot of respects, a lot of people think that they're mutually exclusive. And especially in today's world, if you're a believer in faith, people will look at you and say, well, you clearly don't understand science. But Aquinas wrote a great deal on the natural sciences, did he not?
Yes.
So yeah, so how is it that it's possible to reconcile a faith in a God that cannot be scientifically proven or seen or measured with the scientific method? I mean, obviously as Christians we know that faith and science are not in opposition, but what would you say to somebody who perhaps a young Catholic who has a desire to go into the sciences and is afraid of losing their faith?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We have um, a number of ways of talking about this. So first of all, I would point to the our Aquinas 101 series. So Aquinas 101 is a YouTube series that we have, and that we've just recently put out a free digital learning platform to kind of make it easier, more easily accessible. And in season 2 of our series, we have a whole kind of we go through all of the science and faith questions, basically over the larger ones. And we have not only our friars talking about how science and faith can come together, but we also have scientists from top universities in the United States giving lectures also on how their faith interacts with their work as scientists. So that's the first place I would send them. But the second thing I would remark is that the idea that faith and science contradict is is a widely held belief that's not very well grounded. And it largely comes out of anti-Catholic polemics from the 18th century that became anti-religious polemics in the hands of Enlightenment thinkers. Um, and they tended to use a couple of instances that were, that a couple of instances in history that were in fact problematic. So, for instance, the Galileo affair and things like that. But in general, and so they take those stories and then they create this narrative of conflict, trying to separate the work of science from the work of believers.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the history of science, what you realize is that, in fact, the Catholic Church and believers were deeply involved in scientific investigation and scientific progress.
Sure.
And we can see this, I think, simply if I point out that 3 contemporary fields of science were founded, or the founding principles were established by Catholic priests, including one who was a bishop. So our
Hmm.
theory of geology was the principles of geology, basically, which it sounds so simple that we would say, why would anybody need to discover this? But this was actually a major question. When we'd say that the reason why the rocks are stratified in the way that they are is because, of course, they collected over a long period of time. And so one of the questions that they have to answer is, well, what time relationship do each of the strata have? And then the theories and the principles behind how different rock strata are related to one another was developed by this guy Nicholas Steno, who eventually became a Catholic bishop.
Mm.
He was a convert to the faith, because he was working in the Medici court and came across Catholics, converted to the faith, and eventually pursued a career as a priest, and then also as a missionary bishop in his native lands of Denmark and
That
whatnot.
might be the only convert the Medici's ever made.
You'd be
they have
surprised,
they
but
have
yes,
a
probably
reputation.
that's probably yeah. No, it's an interesting history, that's for sure. But we also have 2 other priests too that were involved in very important sciences. We think of Gregor Mendel and his theory of genetics and
Sure.
inheritance. And one of the things that people tend to forget is that without Mendel's theory of inheritance, Darwin's theory of evolution would not have been accepted.
That's a great
One of
point.
the biggest criticisms of evolution in the early days was that Darwin didn't have a theory of inheritance that would explain why it is that certain privileged traits would be passed on to later generations.
Mm.
But Mendel came up with that theory. And likewise, in the realm of physics, right? Einstein's theory of relativity, general relativity in particular, had some pretty big issues early on, and it was, of course, the priest Father Georges Lemaitre who came up with the theory of the Big Bang that helped to, or came up with the mathematical theory that led to this understanding of the Big Bang, um, that really kind of helped to fix a number of problems in Einstein's original mathematical formulas. And so
Hmm.
what we see there is that we have these religious men who are involved in scientific investigation. Obviously, they didn't think that what their work was doing contradicted the faith, or even hindered being good priests, and they were priests in good standing, right?
Sure.